Iron shackles bit into Sarah's wrists as rain began to fall on the cobblestones of Millbrook's town square. Her crime had been simple, yet unforgivable in the eyes of her deceased husband's family. She had failed to produce an heir during 3 years of marriage, and worse still, she had dared to question the family's business dealings after discovering their involvement in cheating local farmers. "Let this be a lesson to any woman who thinks herself above her station," declared Magistrate Thornfield, his voice cutting through the growing crowd of onlookers. Sarah's mother-in-law, Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore, stood beside him with satisfaction gleaming in her cold eyes. 3 days chained to the punishment oak should teach her proper humility. Sarah's legs trembled as they secured the heavy chains around the ancient tree that had served as the town's place of public shame for over a century. Her late husband's debts, which she had inherited along with his family's scorn, would be forgiven only if she endured this humiliation without complaint. The alternative was debtor's prison, a fate that terrified her more than the shame of public display. Townspeople gathered to witness the spectacle, some crossing themselves and muttering prayers, others pointing and whispering behind gloved hands. Children pressed their faces against shop windows, while their mothers hurried them away from such an unseemly sight. Sarah kept her chin raised despite the fear coursing through her veins, determined not to give her tormentors the satisfaction of seeing her break. Hours passed like years. Rain soaked through her worn dress, plastering dark hair against her pale cheeks. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, while the chains chafed raw wounds around her wrists. Night fell, bringing with it bitter cold that seeped into her bones. She dozed fitfully, waking whenever someone threw pebbles or shouted cruel remarks from the safety of darkness. On the second day, fever began to set in. Sarah's vision blurred as delirium took hold, and she found herself speaking to shadows that weren't there, calling out for her mother who had died years before. The crowd thinned as her condition worsened, leaving only the most callous spectators to witness her deterioration. It was near sunset when the stranger arrived. Marcus Kane rode into town on a black stallion, dust from the mountain trails still clinging to his weathered coat. He was a man of perhaps 35 years, with steel-gray eyes and hands that spoke of hard labor rather than gentle living. A surveyor by trade, he had come to Millbrook to assess land for the railroad company. But the scene in the town square stopped him cold. He dismounted slowly, his gaze fixed on the woman chained to the tree. Sarah's dress hung in tatters, her lips cracked from thirst, her breathing shallow and labored. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, yet even in her weakened state, there was something unbroken in her spirit that called to him. "What is her crime?" Marcus asked a nearby shopkeeper. "Barren wife who got above herself," the man replied with a shrug. Questioned the Whitmore's business practices after her husband passed. "They say she owes debts, but everyone knows it's really about her speaking out of turn." Marcus studied the woman more carefully. Even through the grime and exhaustion, he could see the intelligence in her eyes, the set of her jaw that suggested stubborn courage rather than rebellion born of malice. Something about her situation struck him as profoundly unjust. He approached Magistrate Thornfield, who was enjoying an ale at the tavern across the square. "I want to pay her debts," Marcus announced without preamble. Thornfield nearly choked on his drink. "I beg your pardon?" "The woman's debts. Name your price. I'll settle them in full." "Now, see here, stranger," Mrs. Whitmore interjected, having overheard the conversation. "This is a family matter. That woman owes more than money. She owes respect and obedience." Marcus's expression hardened. "In my experience, respect is earned, not beaten into someone with chains and public humiliation." He pulled out a leather pouch heavy with gold coins. "How much?" The amount named was staggering, far more than any reasonable debt could have been. Marcus suspected they were inflating the sum to discourage him, but he had done well for himself in recent years. Railroad work paid handsomely for those willing to brave dangerous territories. Without hesitation, he counted out the gold. "Release her, now." Thornfield sputtered protests about proper procedures and paperwork, but the sight of real money spoke louder than his objections. Within an hour, Sarah found herself freed from the chains that had bound her for 2.5 days. She collapsed the moment the iron fell away, her legs no longer able to support her weight. Marcus caught her before she could hit the ground, lifting her carefully in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, weakened by exposure and hunger. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because no one deserves what they did to you," he replied simply. Marcus carried Sarah to the town's small inn, where the proprietress, a kind woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who had watched the proceedings with growing dismay, agreed to provide a room and nursing care. For 3 days, Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness while fever ravaged her body. Marcus sat vigil beside her bed, ensuring she received proper food and medicine. When she finally woke with clear eyes, Sarah found herself staring at a man she barely knew yet, who had risked everything to save her. "You spent a fortune on someone you'd never met," she said, her voice still weak but steady. "Money can be earned again," Marcus replied. "Conscience, once compromised, is harder to restore." As Sarah recovered her strength, she learned more about her unlikely savior. Marcus had grown up in similar circumstances, an orphan bound out to farmers who treated him more like property than a person. He had escaped that life through sheer determination and back-breaking labor, eventually earning enough to start his own surveying business. Perhaps that shared experience of powerlessness made him unable to walk away from her plight. "I have nowhere to go," Sarah admitted, once she was well enough to sit up. "The Whitmores made sure every door in this town would be closed to me." "Then don't stay in this town," Marcus suggested. "I have work waiting in Colorado Territory. The railroad is pushing west, and they need settlements along the route. It's hard country, but it's honest work for honest people." Sarah considered his offer carefully. She had no family left, no friends who hadn't abandoned her under pressure from the Whitmores, and no prospects in a place where her reputation had been thoroughly destroyed. "What would you expect from me in return?" she asked, meeting his eyes directly. "Nothing you're not willing to give," Marcus answered. "I need someone who can keep books, manage supplies, and deal with the business side of surveying contracts. You've proven you're not afraid to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you. That's exactly the kind of partner I need. Partner. Not servant, not wife bound by obligation, but partner." The word carried weight that Sarah had never experienced before. 2 weeks later, they departed Millbrook together in a sturdy wagon loaded with surveying equipment and supplies for the journey west. Sarah never looked back at the town that had nearly destroyed her, but she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected sources. Colorado Territory proved every bit as challenging as Marcus had warned. They established their base camp in a growing settlement called Cedar Falls, where the railroad would soon establish a depot. The work was demanding, long days under the blazing sun, measuring distances, calculating grades, and mapping the most efficient routes for steel rails. Sarah discovered she had a natural aptitude for the technical aspects of surveying. Her careful attention to detail and quick grasp of mathematics made her invaluable when it came to drawing precise maps and calculating costs. More importantly, she found herself genuinely respected for her contributions rather than merely tolerated. Their partnership evolved gradually from professional necessity to genuine friendship, and eventually something deeper. Marcus never pressured her or made demands based on his earlier generosity. Instead, he simply treated her as an equal, consulting her judgment on important decisions and trusting her to handle increasingly complex responsibilities. One evening, as they sat by their campfire watching stars emerge over the mountains, Sarah finally spoke about the fears that still haunted her. "What if I can never give you children?" she asked quietly. "What if the Whitmores were right about me being barren?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Do you think less of me because I'm not titled nobility?" Because I don't own vast estates or carry an ancient family name? Of course not. Those things don't define a person's worth. Then why should your ability to bear children define yours? He took her hand gently. Sarah, I've seen you bring dead settlements back to life with your organizational skills. I've watched you nurse injured workers and negotiate with stubborn suppliers. You create value and beauty wherever you go. That's a different kind of fertility, but no less precious. 6 months after leaving Millbrook, Marcus proposed to her not with grand romantic gestures, but with quiet certainty. I want to build something lasting with you, he said. Not because I need you, but because I choose you. Every day, I choose you. Their wedding was simple. A brief ceremony performed by a traveling preacher in front of their small community of fellow railroad workers and settlers. Sarah wore a dress she had sewn herself from blue calico, and Marcus presented her with a ring he had carved from a piece of Rocky Mountain jade. It wasn't the grand society wedding she had once imagined as a young girl, but it was real and honest, and built on foundations stronger than mere romantic infatuation. As the railroad pushed further west, Marcus and Sarah moved with it, establishing temporary homes in a dozen different settlements. Each place brought new challenges: hostile weather, difficult terrain, conflicts with local tribes protecting their hunting grounds. But they faced these obstacles together, their partnership strengthening with each trial overcome. In the 3rd year of their marriage, Sarah made a discovery that would change everything. She was pregnant. The news brought joy tempered with terror. Her previous failure to conceive had been used as a weapon against her for so long that she could barely trust this new reality. Marcus, however, was unequivocally thrilled, though he was careful not to make her pregnancy the sole source of his happiness. Child or no child, you are my family, he reminded her during her moments of doubt. This baby is a gift, not a requirement. Their daughter, Elizabeth, was born during a fierce winter storm in a temporary settlement that would later become the thriving town of Prosperity Creek. Sarah labored for nearly 20 hours while wind howled around their small cabin, but when she finally held her daughter in her arms, every moment of pain disappeared. Elizabeth was followed by 2 sons, William and James, born 2 and 4 years later respectively. Each child was welcomed not as proof of Sarah's worth, but as a blessing to be cherished. Marcus proved to be a devoted father, teaching his children to read, using surveying manuals and telling them bedtime stories about brave pioneers who built new lives from nothing. As their family grew, so did their prosperity. Marcus's surveying business expanded to include town planning and construction oversight. Sarah's talents for organization and negotiation made her a natural politician, and she was eventually elected as the first mayor of Prosperity Creek, a position she held for 6 terms. The settlement they had helped establish grew into a proper town with schools, churches, a hospital, and even a small college. Sarah founded the town's first library and established a fund to help other women escape difficult circumstances, a cause that remained close to her heart throughout her life. News from Millbrook occasionally reached them through letters and newspaper reports. The Whitmore family's business empire had eventually collapsed under the weight of their corrupt practices. Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore died alone and embittered, having driven away everyone who might have cared for her in her final years. Magistrate Thornfield lost his position after a scandal involving embezzled town funds. Sarah felt no satisfaction in their downfalls, only sadness for the unnecessary cruelty they had inflicted on others. She had learned that harboring resentment was like carrying hot coals in her bare hands. It hurt her far more than her intended targets. When Elizabeth turned 16, she asked her mother about the scars that still marked her wrists, faint white lines that spoke of old chains and older pain. Sarah told her daughter the truth about Millbrook, about the tree and the iron shackles, and about the stranger who had changed everything. "Weren't you angry at the people who hurt you?" Elizabeth asked. "For a time," Sarah admitted, "but anger is exhausting to carry. and it leaves no room for joy. I chose to focus on building something better rather than tearing down what had already harmed me. Elizabeth grew up to become a teacher and later a judge, carrying forward her parents' commitment to justice and compassion. William became an engineer, designing bridges that connected isolated communities to the growing railroad network. James followed his father into surveying, but expanded into mining engineering, helping establish several successful copper and silver operations. All three children understood that their mother's strength came not from avoiding hardship, but from transforming it into purpose. They watched her turn a near-death experience into a foundation for helping others, and they carried that lesson into their own adult lives. Marcus and Sarah worked side by side for over 30 years, watching the American West transform from untamed wilderness into a network of thriving communities. They witnessed the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, the discovery of major mineral deposits, and the gradual establishment of law and order in territories that had once been governed only by survival instincts. When Marcus died of pneumonia at age 68, Sarah felt as though half her soul had been torn away. He had been her partner in every sense of the word, professionally, personally, and spiritually. Their marriage had been built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than mere romantic passion, making it stronger than many unions that began with greater fanfare. Sarah lived another 12 years after Marcus's death, continuing their surveying business with the help of her sons and maintaining her civic commitments until her health began to fail. She passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 79, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who had benefited from the life she and Marcus had built together. At her funeral, people came from across 3 states to pay their respects. Former railroad workers who had been treated fairly when others cheated them. Women who had escaped abusive situations with help from Sarah's assistance fund. Children who had learned to read in the library she established. Politicians who had learned from her example that true leadership meant serving others rather than enriching oneself. The pastor who conducted her service spoke about transformation, how a woman who had been chained to a tree as punishment had become the foundation upon which an entire community was built. Sarah Kane's life proves that our worst moments do not have to define us, he said. Instead, they can become the raw material from which we build something beautiful. In the town cemetery of Prosperity Creek, 2 headstones stand side by side beneath a grove of aspens that Sarah had planted decades earlier. Marcus's stone reads simply, "Beloved husband and father who chose courage over comfort." Sarah's bears the inscription she had requested. She was chained but learned to fly. Visitors to the cemetery often comment on how the trees seem to whisper in the wind, as though sharing secrets about resilience and redemption. Local children grow up hearing stories about the woman who became their town's first mayor and the man who risked everything to save a stranger. These tales become part of the community's mythology, passed down through generations as examples of what ordinary people can accomplish when they refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Elizabeth Kane Thornton, named ironically after the magistrate who had tormented her mother, became one of the first female federal judges in the Western Territories. She often credited her mother's example as the source of her commitment to protecting the vulnerable from those who would abuse their power. William Kane's bridges connected isolated mining communities to major transportation networks, enabling economic development that lifted entire regions out of poverty. He always built his structures to last, saying he had learned from his parents that true value came from creating things that would benefit future generations. James Kane's mining operations were known throughout the industry for treating workers fairly and implementing safety measures that other companies considered unnecessary expenses. When asked about his business philosophy, he would simply say that he had been raised to believe that profit meant nothing if it came at the cost of human dignity. The surveying company that Marcus and Sarah had built together continued to operate for over a century, eventually expanding into urban planning and environmental consulting. The firm's motto, inscribed on every contract and business card, reflected the values its founders had lived by, building tomorrow with integrity today. Prosperity Creek grew into a small city of nearly 50,000 residents, anchored by the college that Sarah had helped establish and the hospital that bore Marcus's name. The town's prosperity came not from a single industry, but from the diversified economy that the Caines had helped plan, a mix of agriculture, light manufacturing, education, and tourism that provided stability even during economic downturns. Modern visitors to Prosperity Creek can still see evidence of Sarah and Marcus's influence throughout the community. The main street follows the route Marcus surveyed in 1847. The City Hall occupies the site where Sarah held her first mayoral meeting in a tent. The public library she founded has grown into a regional research center, and the assistance fund she established has evolved into a comprehensive social services organization. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of their partnership can be found in the community's character rather than its physical infrastructure. Prosperity Creek has maintained a tradition of welcoming newcomers and supporting those facing difficult circumstances. The town has one of the lowest crime rates in the state, not because of harsh law enforcement, but because of strong social connections that prevent problems before they escalate. Local schools teach students about the town's founding story, not as distant history, but as a living example of how individual choices can create lasting change. Children learn that Sarah Caine was once considered worthless by those in power, but that assessment said more about her critics than about her true value. They discover that Marcus Caine could have walked away from injustice without consequences, but chose intervention instead of indifference. These lessons shape how Prosperity Creek residents approach contemporary challenges. When economic pressures threaten family farms, the community works together to find sustainable solutions rather than accepting failure as inevitable. When social tensions arise, people remember that their town was built by someone who had been treated as an outcast and someone who had defended her at personal cost. The annual Founders' Day celebration includes a reenactment of Sarah's rescue, though the organizers are careful to focus on the transformation rather than the trauma. Local actors portray the moment when Marcus first questioned her treatment, emphasizing how one person's courage to speak up can change everything for someone else. During these performances, Sarah is shown not as a helpless victim, but as a woman who maintained her dignity even under impossible circumstances. Marcus is portrayed not as a romantic hero, but as an ordinary man who made an extraordinary choice to act according to his principles rather than his convenience. The reenactment always concludes with scenes from their later life. Sarah conducting a town meeting, Marcus training young surveyors, their children growing up in a community that valued character over status. These final scenes remind audiences that rescue is only the beginning of transformation, not its completion. As economic development has brought new challenges to Prosperity Creek, residents often invoke the Caine legacy when making difficult decisions. Development proposals are evaluated not just for their immediate financial benefits, but for their long-term impact on community character. Business leaders are expected to demonstrate social responsibility as well as profitability, following the example set by the town's founders. The story of Sarah and Marcus Caine has been told and retold in countless variations over the decades. Historians have documented the facts. Novelists have explored the emotions. Filmmakers have captured the drama. But regardless of the medium, certain themes remain constant. The importance of standing up for justice, the power of choosing compassion over convenience, and the possibility of building something beautiful from the wreckage of disaster. In recent years, scholars have noted how their story reflects broader patterns in American development, The movement westward in search of opportunity, the gradual establishment of democratic institutions in frontier communities, and the ongoing struggle to extend equality and justice to all citizens, regardless of their circumstances. Sarah's experience of being literally chained as punishment for speaking truth to power resonates with contemporary discussions about how societies treat those who challenge corruption or question authority. Her transformation from victim to leader illustrates the potential for resilience and growth even after severe trauma. Marcus's decision to intervene in a situation that didn't directly affect him provides a model for active citizenship that goes beyond voting or passive support. His willingness to risk his own resources and reputation for a stranger's welfare demonstrates how individual actions can have far-reaching consequences for entire communities. Together, their partnership shows how genuine equality in marriage and business can create strength that neither person could achieve alone. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than traditional gender roles or economic necessity, making it remarkably modern despite its 19th century setting. The physical landscape around Prosperity Creek still bears traces of their work. Hiking trails follow routes that Marcus originally surveyed for potential railroad spurs. The irrigation systems that support local agriculture were designed using techniques Sarah learned from consulting with immigrant farmers about water management. Even the town's street grid reflects their belief that communities should be planned for human flourishing rather than mere efficiency. Environmental scientists have noted how the Keynes approach to development anticipated many principles of sustainable planning that didn't become widely accepted until decades later. They preserved significant green spaces within the town boundaries, established buffer zones between residential and industrial areas, and insisted on infrastructure that could adapt to future growth rather than requiring complete replacement. Their influence extended beyond Prosperity Creek to other communities throughout the region. Towns established along the railroad route often sought their advice on planning and governance. Sarah's innovations in municipal organization were copied by dozens of other mayors, while Marcus's surveying techniques became standard practice throughout the Western Territories. The correspondence they maintained with other pioneers provides historians with detailed insights into how frontier communities actually functioned, moving beyond romantic myths to reveal the complex negotiations and compromises required to build stable societies from scratch. Their letters show how ordinary people grappled with extraordinary challenges, making decisions that would affect generations of future residents. Modern readers of their writings are often struck by how contemporary their concerns seem. They worried about balancing economic development with environmental protection. They struggled to create inclusive communities while respecting diverse cultural traditions. They sought to establish effective governance without stifling individual initiative. These universal challenges help explain why their story continues to resonate with audiences more than a century and a half after the events it describes. The specific details may be rooted in 19th century frontier life, but the underlying questions about justice, courage, and community remain as relevant today as they were in 1847. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah and Marcus Keynes' legacy demonstrates that history is made not just by famous politicians and wealthy industrialists, but by ordinary people who choose to act on their principles when it matters most. Their story proves that individual courage, combined with mutual support and long-term commitment, can indeed change the world, one community at a time. Years after both Sarah and Marcus had passed away, their great-granddaughter Emma Kane discovered a collection of letters hidden in the attic of the old family home. These correspondence pieces, yellowed with age and tied with faded ribbon, revealed intimate details about the early days of their relationship that had never been shared publicly. In one letter, written during their first winter in Colorado Territory, Sarah confessed to Marcus her deepest fears about their partnership. "Some nights I wake up expecting to find chains around my wrists again," she wrote. "Not because I doubt your kindness, but because I struggle to believe that someone like me deserves the life we're building together. You saved me from more than just iron shackles. You rescued me from the belief that I was worthless." Marcus's response, found among the same collection, revealed his own vulnerabilities. "You speak of worthlessness, but you fail to see what I saw that day in Millbrook Square," he replied. "I saw a woman who refused to break, even when breaking would have been easier. I saw someone who chose dignity over survival, truth over safety. I didn't save you, Sarah. I simply recognized what was already there." These letters painted a picture of two people who continued to save each other long after that first dramatic rescue. Sarah's business acumen helped Marcus's surveying company survive several economic downturns that destroyed other enterprises. Marcus's unwavering support gave Sarah the confidence to pursue political ambitions that seemed impossible for a woman in their era. Emma Kane decided to donate these letters to the Prosperity Creek Historical Society, where they became the centerpiece of a new exhibit about frontier families. Visitors were particularly moved by a series of letters Sarah had written to other women facing difficult circumstances, offering practical advice and emotional support. "Remember that chains rust, but character endures," Sarah had written to a young widow struggling to support her children alone. "What others see as your weakness may actually be the source of your greatest strength. I was told that my inability to bear children made me worthless, yet I went on to mother an entire community. Your path may be different from what you planned, but that doesn't make it less valuable." The discovery of these letters prompted renewed interest in the Kane family story, leading to several academic studies about their role in Western development. Researchers found evidence that Sarah's influence on municipal governance had been even more significant than previously recognized. Her innovations in public health, education funding, and infrastructure planning had been adopted by communities across 3 states. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, a descendant of the magistrate who had once tormented Sarah, conducted extensive research into her ancestors' role in the original events. Her published work, Justice Delayed: How Corruption in Millbrook Led to Progress in Prosperity Creek, became a definitive account of how personal redemption could create lasting social change. "My ancestor made choices that caused immense suffering," Dr. Thornfield wrote in her conclusion. But Sarah Kane's response to that suffering created benefits that outlasted the harm. She chose to build rather than to revenge, to include rather than to exclude. This doesn't excuse the injustice she endured, but it does demonstrate how individual responses to trauma can shape entire communities for generations. Archaeological excavations in Millbrook during the 1990s uncovered the remains of the punishment oak where Sarah had been chained. The tree had been cut down decades earlier, but its massive root system still extended deep into the town square. Local officials debated whether to mark the site or leave it undisturbed. The decision came from an unexpected source. Prosperity Creek City Council, now led by Sarah's great-great-grandson, offered to fund a memorial garden at the site. The garden would acknowledge the injustice that had occurred there, while celebrating the resilience of those who had survived such treatment. The memorial, dedicated on the 150th anniversary of Sarah's rescue, featured a bronze sculpture of broken chains being transformed into flowering vines. The inscription, taken from one of Sarah's letters, read, "From the hardest ground, the strongest roots can grow." Representatives from dozens of communities that had been influenced by the Kane's work attended the dedication ceremony. Speakers included mayors, judges, business leaders, and educators who traced their institutions' founding principles back to innovations first implemented in Prosperity Creek. But perhaps the most moving tribute came from Maria Santos. A recent immigrant who had benefited from modern versions of the assistance programs Sarah had established. When I came to this country with nothing, strangers helped me find work, housing, and education for my children, Maria said. I learned that this tradition of helping newcomers started with a woman who had once been considered worthless by society. Now I work to help others the same way I was helped, continuing a chain of kindness that began over a century ago. The Memorial Garden in Millbrook became a pilgrimage site for people seeking inspiration during difficult times. Visitors often left flowers or small stones, creating an informal tribute to anyone who had ever been judged unfairly or treated as less than human. School groups from across the region made field trips to both Millbrook and Prosperity Creek, learning about how individual choices could create lasting consequences across generations. Students were particularly impressed by the contrast between the two communities, one that had chosen cruelty and ultimately declined, another that had chosen compassion and flourished. These educational programs emphasized that heroes weren't necessarily people with special powers or extraordinary circumstances. Marcus Kane had been an ordinary surveyor with no particular wealth or influence beyond his willingness to act according to his principles. Sarah Kane had been considered a failure by her original community's standards, yet she had built something that outlasted all her critics. Contemporary social workers and activists found particular relevance in Sarah's approach to helping others. Rather than simply providing temporary relief, she had created systems that addressed root causes of poverty and discrimination. Her assistance fund didn't just give money to women in crisis. It provided training, connections, and ongoing support that enabled genuine independence. Modern businesses in Prosperity Creek still operated according to principles the Kanes had established, prioritizing long-term sustainability over short-term profits and treating employees as partners rather than resources to be exploited. This approach had helped the community weather numerous economic challenges that had devastated other towns. The Kane Institute for Community Development, established by their descendants in partnership with the local college, had become a nationally recognized center for training civic leaders and social entrepreneurs. Its programs attracted students from around the world who wanted to learn how to build inclusive, sustainable communities. Institute researchers had documented how the Kane model of development had influenced community planning in hundreds of locations worldwide. Their emphasis on combining economic opportunity with social responsibility had become a template for international development programs in emerging economies. As Prosperity Creek entered the 21st century, city planners faced new challenges related to technology, globalization, and climate change. But they continued to approach these problems using principles that Sarah and Marcus had established over 150 years earlier, prioritizing long-term community welfare over immediate convenience, seeking solutions that included rather than excluded affected populations, and maintaining faith that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they worked together. The story that had begun with a woman chained to a tree as punishment had evolved into a legacy of empowerment, justice, and hope that continued to inspire new generations of leaders and citizens. It proved that even the most painful experiences could become sources of strength when channeled toward building something better than what had been destroyed. In the end, Sarah and Marcus Kane's greatest achievement wasn't the town they had helped establish or the businesses they had built. It was the demonstration that love, whether romantic, familial, or communal, could indeed triumph over hatred, that inclusion was stronger than exclusion, and that ordinary people possessed the power to transform not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others they would never meet. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that we all have choices to make when confronted with injustice. We can walk away, we can participate, or we can intervene. The consequences of those choices echo far beyond our individual lives, shaping the kind of world we leave for future generations. In choosing compassion over convenience, Sarah and Marcus Kane had chosen not just their own destiny, but the destiny of everyone who would benefit from the community they had helped create. During the global pandemic of 2020, when communities worldwide faced unprecedented challenges, the Kane Institute received hundreds of requests for guidance from civic leaders struggling to maintain social cohesion during crisis. The principles that Sarah and Marcus had developed during their own time of hardship, prioritizing collective welfare while protecting individual dignity, maintaining hope during uncertainty, and building systems that could adapt to changing circumstances, proved remarkably relevant for modern emergency management. Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had become the Institute's director after studying community resilience in post-conflict regions, often referenced the Kane model when advising international organizations. What made their approach unique wasn't just their compassion, she explained, during a virtual conference attended by mayors from 6 continents. It was their understanding that true security comes from ensuring that everyone in a community has a stake in its success. When people feel valued and included, they become part of the solution rather than sources of additional problems. This philosophy had guided Prosperity Creek through the economic disruption caused by the pandemic. While other communities struggled with social unrest and political division, the town's residents worked together to support vulnerable neighbors, adapt businesses to new requirements, and maintain educational services for children. The mutual aid networks that Sarah had first established in the 1850s had evolved into sophisticated support systems that could respond rapidly to emerging needs. Local historians noted that this crisis response reflected patterns established during the town's earliest days. When drought had threatened the settlement in 1852, residents had shared water resources rather than hoarding them. When a diphtheria outbreak struck in 1861, families had cared for orphaned children collectively rather than sending them to distant institutions. The same spirit of collective responsibility that had helped the community survive 19th-century challenges enabled it to navigate 21st-century difficulties. Rebecca Thompson, a filmmaker who had moved to Prosperity Creek to document pandemic response strategies, was struck by how naturally residents spoke about community obligations. "They don't talk about helping others as charity or virtue signaling," she observed in her documentary notes. "It's just what you do when you're part of something larger than yourself. There's an assumption that everyone contributes according to their abilities and receives support according to their needs." This culture of mutual responsibility had deep roots in the relationship between Sarah and Marcus themselves. Their marriage had been based on partnership rather than traditional gender hierarchies, with each contributing their unique strengths to shared goals. Sarah's political and organizational skills complemented Marcus's technical expertise and physical capabilities. Neither tried to dominate or control the other. Instead, they had created a model of collaboration that their community had absorbed and perpetuated. Contemporary relationship counselors studying their correspondence noted how they had navigated disagreements through respectful dialogue rather than power struggles. When they differed on important decisions, whether to expand the surveying business, how to respond to territorial political conflicts, or how to balance work with family responsibilities, they sought solutions that honored both perspectives rather than declaring winners and losers. Their letters showed two people who genuinely liked each other as individuals, beyond romantic attraction or practical convenience, observed Dr. Amanda Chen, a psychologist who had written extensively about healthy relationship patterns. They were curious about each other's thoughts, supportive of each other's growth, and committed to each other's well-being, even when that required personal sacrifice. This emotional security allowed them to take risks in their public lives that might have been impossible without such strong private foundations. This personal dynamic had influenced how they approached community leadership. Rather than competing for authority or recognition, they had worked to develop other leaders who could carry forward their vision. Sarah had mentored dozens of women in political organizing and business management. Marcus had trained numerous young surveyors and engineers who went on to establish their own successful practices throughout the Western Territories. Their approach to leadership development reflected their belief that sustainable change required building capacity rather than creating dependency. Instead of positioning themselves as indispensable figures whose departure would threaten community stability, they had systematically transferred knowledge and authority to others who could adapt their methods to changing circumstances. This philosophy explained why Prosperity Creek had continued to thrive long after its founders' deaths, while other communities that had depended too heavily on charismatic individuals had struggled when those leaders moved away or passed on. The town's institutions had been designed to function effectively regardless of who occupied specific positions, ensuring continuity even during periods of transition. Modern organizational consultants studying the Kane legacy identified several key principles that had enabled this institutional resilience. First, decision-making processes emphasized transparency and inclusive participation rather than top-down authority. Second, leadership roles rotated regularly to prevent concentration of power and to develop multiple people with necessary skills. Third, community resources were managed as shared assets rather than private property, ensuring that essential services remained available even during financial difficulties. These principles had been tested repeatedly throughout the town's history. During the Great Depression, when many communities faced economic collapse, Prosperity Creek had maintained essential services by converting to a partially cooperative economy. Residents had bartered skills and resources, shared equipment and facilities, and collectively supported struggling families until broader economic recovery made traditional employment possible again. Similar adaptability had characterized the community's response to technological changes that disrupted traditional industries. When railroad employment declined due to automotive transportation, local leaders had successfully attracted manufacturing businesses that could utilize existing infrastructure and workforce skills. When manufacturing moved overseas in the late 20th century, the town had transitioned to a service and education economy anchored by the college and the Kane Institute. Each transition had been managed according to principles that prioritized community welfare over individual profit, long-term sustainability over short-term gain, and inclusive prosperity over competitive advantage. These values, originally modeled by Sarah and Marcus in their personal relationship, had become embedded in the community's institutional culture so deeply that they guided decision-making even when residents weren't consciously aware of their historical origins. Visitors to Prosperity Creek often commented on the town's distinctive atmosphere, a sense of purposefulness and mutual care that seemed rare in contemporary society. Children played safely in neighborhoods where adults looked out for all young people, not just their own. Businesses operated with unusual attention to customer service and employee satisfaction. Local government functioned with remarkable efficiency and minimal corruption. These characteristics weren't accidental results of favorable circumstances or exceptional leadership. They reflected intentional choices made consistently over multiple generations, beginning with two people who had decided that building something beautiful together was more important than protecting themselves from potential disappointment or loss. The story of Sarah chained to a tree and Marcus who freed her had become more than historical narrative. It had evolved into a living tradition that continued to inspire people facing their own moments of choice between self-interest and service, between cynicism and hope, between building walls and building bridges.